right, so to continue, like I said, this was after the pandemic. Like I said, I'd become a leftist, anti-white again, kind of communist. And I was hanging out with a lot of hippies, like people who do a lot of drugs and stuff. And even though I don't do any drugs, but, I was back in a lot of them are Jewish and, kind of, but as I said, my ex's dad was Jewish, and I think that she was kind of leftist, and it might have been, or she had an El Salvadorian daughter, and even her sister had like a half brown daughter, and my ex was her mom was Italian, her dad was English, but her mom broke up with her dad and went with a Jewish guy, and so she and I seen him before, I seen her dad before, and he's like very Jewish looking, and so I think it's common, she might see herself as more Jewish, and it's common among people who are Jewish to be more leftist and anti-white. And it's not always the case, but it's very common. And it was a case for me. I always wanted race mixing and all that. And so like she was a fan of Megan Thee Stallion, I remember. She was like, "Oh yeah, Megan Thee Stallion she's like really good. And did you know that she went to college? She's educated." Because, my ex, maybe because of her Jewish stepdad, she did drugs. So she did a lot of drugs growing up. And I think that she probably thought that sexuality is not bad because, that's what a Jewish stepdad, and her dad he's a Jewish stepdad, but he's also a psychologist. So I imagine that he probably taught her, the Freudian type of stuff like, "Oh yeah, sex is good. What's bad is when you're trying to restrict people. And that's what creates mental illness, restriction of sexuality." When in reality, the studies actually show that the more freely sexual society is, the more promiscuity in a society, the more mental illness. Even though mental illness is kind of a social construction, but regardless, what it indicates is that there's more instability and suffering when there is a more free sex society. But that's what Freud wanted to promulgate, because Freud saw himself as Jewish, and he actually was against a Christian society, and he even admitted that. He claimed that his hero was Baal, who fought the Roman Empire, and he saw that as the Semites fighting the Europeans. So he saw himself as a Semite, and he tried to, him and like Wilhelm Reich was another Jewish guy who tried to promote free sexuality. And now my grandpa would say it is true that that prudishness is not necessarily the flow. If that's not the flow, because you still believe that you're a separate self, and you're still trying to save the self by, maybe pleasing God by being prude, and that's still self-confirmatory. You still believe that you're a separate self. But my grandpa would say that that also, though hypersexuality and promiscuity is also, my grandpa would say that's existentially invalid. It leads to suffering. It doesn't lead to true happiness. But my grandpa would say, like, I would misuse my grandpa's teachings, and I'd be like, so actually being hypersexual and promiscuous is actually closer to the flow, because at least you could get yourself in trouble, and then you'd be more likely to get in the flow than the prude person who's in social conformity, and he'll always stay in the illusion that he's a separate self. And that's like the prodigal son. Is the prodigal son, he goes out and he sins, and he actually becomes closer because he expanded his awareness, and he recognized, and he did a U-turn. But again, so I wanted to say the good is bad and the bad is good, and I wanted to promote that and believe that. So and like I said, I became for abortion. I was anti-white. I was for, because when my grandpa talked about the flow, again, I didn't understand what my grandpa was saying. So when my grandpa's talking about the flow, I'm thinking that that's race mixing. So I'm like, yeah, white supremacy is not the flow because you still believe you're a separate self. So we should race mix, but that's also not the flow. Race mixing also isn't the flow. Neither one's necessarily the flow, but I didn't understand that at the time, right? So I'll get to that later. I'll get to when I started to understand that. But so basically, I saw myself as Jewish, went back to being a leftist, anti-white, and what happened was, like I said, my ex, she grew up and she clearly was I was anti-white, and she was like the epitome of that. She had a brown daughter. She was a drug addict. She, and then I asked her at one point, this was after she went to the party. She went to that party and she lied to me about going to the Halloween party. And then we met up with each other at the Ralph's. And I asked her, have you ever had sex with a black guy? And she said, yeah, I had sex with a black guy before. And I was like, oh gosh. But she was like, he wasn't black. He was like half black. And I was like, okay. But I knew that she was promiscuous. She had sex with a bunch of guys. So she's a product of the culture. And like I said, she's a product of the leftist culture. So this is before Andrew Tate became popular. So like I said, when she was like, Ryan, I'm going to go to the movies tonight or tomorrow. So you don't have to come over. And I was like, it was Halloween. So I was like, it's probably a Halloween party. I was like, are you sure? Can you send me pictures? And then she admitted, okay, I'm going to a Halloween party. And she was going with her friend Sylvie. And she's like, well, she didn't want to tell me because she's friends with Sylvie. But that's disrespectful. Again, she didn't respect me. But she didn't know that I discovered Theory of Everything. And also, like I said, my parents wouldn't talk to me. And she doesn't know the whole backstory about that. She's going to make assumptions, like everybody will make assumptions. And they're going to assume that I have personality disorder and that there's a valid reason why my parents won't talk to me or see me. But they don't know that that's not necessarily the case. And in my case, that isn't true. It's really stupidity on my parents' part. And people who know me, and I'll get to this, but my parents haven't interacted with me. People will assume, oh, your parents must be interacting with you, and they must know. No, my parents haven't even seen me since college. So people won't understand that. People will assume that I deserved it, that they will blame the victim, but it's not the case in my case. But of course, my ex, she made assumptions, and so she didn't respect me. She stopped respecting me. She wanted to meet my parents for Thanksgiving, but my parents wouldn't meet her because my mom told her that she's never going to see me. So, that didn't help my case. And I do think if my parents would have seen us, things would have been better. And I talked to my grandpa about that. And my grandpa even admitted that. He said, yeah, your parents, if they would have seen you, probably it wouldn't have gone as bad as it did. And it might have actually gone okay. It might have been good. But, so my ex was disrespecting me, and that's a consequence that I face a lot when people, and she's already has mental issues, and she already might not be the brightest tool in this, the brightest bulb in the box. So, so she's upset, and she was upset about that. And then, she's telling me, oh yeah, I had sex with a black guy before. And, like I said, I would go to her place and we would watch movies, and she would lay down and she would put her feet toward me. So again, she's disrespecting me at this point. She's disrespecting me. She put her feet toward me. She'd watch the movie, and, but she's pregnant at this point. So, but again, the fact of the matter is she didn't respect me. And my grandpa would say, it's not important to be respected because you don't exist. The self is an illusion. But if someone's disrespecting you, my grandpa would say that is an indicator of software issue on the part of that person. Either predator, prey, superior, inferior. It's a sign of immaturity. And she didn't have to be disrespecting me like she was. She's pregnant with my baby. When I was texting her and asking how everything going after she got mad at me, after she was the one who lied to me about going to the Halloween party, she should have been responding to me. But again, disrespect. But in her mind, she's probably thinking, well, his own parents won't even talk to him. He probably has problems. So she's going to justify it to herself. But regardless, my grandpa would say that's immaturity. If she's a mature person, she would be respectful, but she wasn't. And she's pregnant. But again, my grandpa would say it's not my fault, but it was my software's fault, because I still was a leftist, and I was anti-religion, and I looked at the world through Darwinian lens because Darwinism is anti-religion. And I like Darwinism because it was anti-religion and anti-white. So, because I saw religion as white supremacy and maintaining the status quo. And that's why I wanted to believe Darwinism instead. So, when I got my ex pregnant, I did that in large part because I believed in Darwinism, and I was selfish. It's kind of a narcissism almost, where I'm thinking, I believe that I'm a separate self, which my grandpa says is an illusion. And I wanted to have a baby so that I could be superior, inferior software, as opposed to being in the flow where I would most likely in the flow, you would marry the person. But my grandpa said there is no formula for the flow. But I would have looked at all the red flags, and I wouldn't have impregnated her. But I didn't care because I just wanted to have a baby so that I could be superior and spread my genes because I believed in Darwinism. And I had a materialistic viewpoint of reality that wasn't spiritual. And I wanted to be a superior person as opposed to a beneficial presence, as my grandpa says. Because that's when you transcend the person, the self, into oneness consciousness. And so I didn't really care. I wanted to have a baby to be superior, but I didn't think about all the implications. The fact that if you have a baby out of wedlock, that brings a lot of suffering. It hurts society. It hurts you. It hurts the baby. It is not harmonious. And I didn't really think about all that. So I was not in the flow. I was more in a selfish, restricted orientation. But again, also at this time, my grandpa wasn't teaching me. My grandpa had stopped teaching me, but I'm going to get to that when I go back to my stories. But so, and I thought that if I had a baby also that my mom and dad would talk to me again. And maybe my grandpa too. Because my grandpa stopped teaching me. My mom and dad weren't talking to me. So I'll get to all that when I do my based on true story stuff about what happened with that. So my ex was disrespecting me. She's a fan of Megan Thee Stallion. Oh, she's educated. I heard that she went to college. And Megan Thee Stallion, she's doing her, twerking butt stuff. So, my ex is thinking like, oh, this is really awesome. This is educated. This is what educated women do. They act like sluts. Now, I'm not trying to be judgmental because my grandpa said that that's self-confirmatory, but the promiscuous behavior that like Megan Thee Stallion's anti-white, anti-society. She wants to tear down society. She's a Marxist too. And that's what education is. Oh, she's educated. No, she's educated in the materialistic mindset, and she's expressing dualistic software, self-confirmatory, self-indulgent software. She's not necessarily educated. That's like negative education. So she's a fan of like Megan Thee Stallion, and she's so talented. No, she's not talented. My ex was a fan of the black female rappers who are basically just like degenerate, trying to they express dualistic software, probably predator prey toward white people, trying to undermine society, undermine religion. Their stuff is just completely antithetical to higher levels of consciousness. But that's what my ex was into, because my ex, she thought that she was educated. Probably her Jewish stepdad, who's a psychologist, taught her, yeah, free sexuality is actually very healthy. And clearly it rubbed off on my ex because my ex told me, she was promiscuous. She had many STDs. She had done a lot of drugs. And then she was started to hang out with those people who I was hanging out with who were sexually promiscuous, very self-indulgent, almost mentally ill, narcissistic people, So, so then I'm basically, she's pregnant. And then I remember it was right before Thanksgiving. And then, like I said, I went to her place, and then she asked me, I go to her place, and then she asked me, hey, Ryan, your friend Malik, he has a younger daughter, right? Do you think that my daughter can have play dates with his daughter? And I'm like, oh, you want to fuck a black guy? You want to fuck Malik? And she's like, what? Well, why the fuck would you ask if you could have play dates with Malik's daughter? She had never met Malik. I had told her about Malik because we were supposed to go on a double date. And I was saying, oh, maybe we can go with Malik. And I told her about him. And I tried to like talk him up because, again, I read that book, Mate, which is based around Darwinian principles. Like if you have cool friends and talk them up, because that actually increases your status and it shows that you have good genes because you good social genes. So again, I was thinking in a Darwinian framework, and that was my downfall. I wasn't in the flow. I was still thinking of myself as a separate individual trying to be superior. I wanted to have offspring so I could be superior through the Darwinian lens. It was not the flow. So, so I'm like, you want to fuck Malik? Anyways, so then she ended up not taking me to Thanksgiving, but that was okay. I didn't fight her. I was just like, I asked her, do you still love me? And she said, no, I don't love you. So that made it hurt even worse, because now I'm thinking, yeah, of course she doesn't love me. She wants to fuck my friend Malik. Asking to have plays with Malik, that's not cool. So then I started talking to my friends about that, and my friends were like, dude, like I talked to my friend, I'm not going to say their names, but I talked to one of my friends, and he was like, dude, she asked if she could have a play date with Malik's daughter. He's like, that's fucked up. And I was like, yeah. And then my other friends were like, yeah, dude, that's demonic. She does not respect you, dude. She does not respect you. And I was like, yeah, and it fucked me up really bad. I was like, dude, I was having like nightmares of that shit. Like I was thinking like, God, she wants to fuck because I know Malik, I know a lot of those dudes, they degrade women, dude. They fuck anything that fucking moves. And she wants to fuck a black guy. So I was just like, dude. But according to her, when I talked to her later, she's like, I didn't want to fuck him. I just wanted to I wanted to get him back in your life so you could play basketball with him and get back into basketball. And I was like, maybe, but still, it's just not appropriate. It wasn't an appropriate thing to ask. And then she was like, later she was like, but what about, when you introduced me to your friend Seth? And I was like, yeah, I introduced him to my friend Seth. But if you asked, can I have play dates with Seth's daughter, I would find that fucking weird. That would be weird. But again, I can't blame, I have to look at my software. I put myself in this situation. I was in a Darwinian primitive lens of seeing things. I wasn't thinking in terms of the flow. I didn't see everything as one in energy, as my grandpa says. I wasn't in synergy. I was a Darwinist, Marxist, leftist, anti-white, and I got myself involved, and I wanted to be superior, and I wanted to save the Jews by destroying the white race. And I got myself involved with another kind of Marxist deluded girl who was into rap music and had a brown daughter, and look what ended up happening. And then I ended up getting really badly hurt, So, but also I wasn't in the flow and stuff, but we'll get to that. But, and also my family had abandoned me, and it's a lot of stuff. I can't completely blame myself, but at the same time, my grandpa would say, transcend cause and effect thinking. I don't want to think in terms of cause and effect. My grandpa would say, all that matters is upgrade your software. And my software was not upgraded. I was still operating under a Darwinian primitive lens, thinking of myself as a separate being, as a separate person, as opposed to oneness consciousness and being in pure awareness and seeing things as they truly are. I was not seeing things, I was not acting optimally. So regardless, so she says that, and then she ended up going to Thanksgiving without me. And then a little while later, I'm going back to her place a little bit, but I remember we were watching these movies and stuff, and one of the movies was with like this black kid who was dating this white girl, and then there was this white guy who didn't like it, and he was kind of religious, and there was this also stalker white guy. And I remember Katie or my ex was like making fun of me, saying like, oh, you're like that guy, the white guy who was like the stalker. But and I was like, okay, so you're like the fucking girl who's fucking the black guy. And that's what the fucking the movie was trying to show, like make the black guy the good guy, and the girl who's like fucking a black guy the good girl. And I was just like, yeah, no wonder you want to fuck Malik, But so I'm, we're doing this. But anyways, like I said, when I would watch movies with her, she would like lay with her feet toward me. She didn't like me anymore. She didn't respect me. But then, so she was like, I asked her one of the nights, can I sleep over tonight? And she's like, we still have to work our way back to you sleeping over. I don't know if I really trust you yet. After she didn't know if she trusted me after she's the one who lied to me about going to a Halloween party, but I'm the one who, so again, I put myself in a situation. I shouldn't have got her pregnant. I should have, that was my mistake. That was my fault. I should, you should vet the person. My grandpa would say, if I was in the flow, I would have been able to discern her software and discern the software and not put myself in a negative situation like that. So then I ended up, but yeah, so I didn't sleep over one night, and then I went back to my place, and then in the morning she calls me and she's like, Ryan, I'm bleeding. Her vagina was bleeding. So I drive over, pick her up from the hospital that was close to her place, and I drive her to a different hospital. And then we were afraid that she was having a miscarriage, but she didn't have a miscarriage. The doctor said that the baby was completely healthy. The heartbeat was good. So I'll get to this. So, but then after that, that's when I slept over at her place, and I caught her Snapchatting another guy. So I'll get to that.